Hey y'all, welcome to the Southern Appalachian Herbal Podcast. I'm Judson Carroll and I'm an herbalist. I'm also a wild crafter, a gardener, and herb grower. I'm coming to you from high atop the beautiful Blue Ridge Mountains of North Carolina, just a stone's throw from the Tennessee line, overlooking the Pisgah National Forest. Absolutely surrounded by the bounty of God's green earth. I spent most of my life wandering these mountains and learning about plants from the old-timers and all sorts of characters. On this show, we'll talk about herbs and how to use them, how to find them, how to grow them, how to make preparations. We'll talk about a lot of things. We can also talk about permaculture, homesteading, foraging, and living off the land. Most anything, really. You can email me at southernappalachianherbs@gmail.com if you have a question or a comment. You can also contact me through the Grow Network, where I'm a regular contributor and a moderator for the forums. And my blog is, of course, southernappalachianherbs@blogspot.com. All right, y'all. I'm going to sit my guitar down and let's talk about herbs.
Hey y'all, welcome to today's show. Today we're going to get into some of the most medicinal herbs that you'll ever run across in the wild that are often considered weeds if they're not growing in your garden. You probably grow some of these in your garden too, at least you should. And they're actually my favorite of all wild forage foods. So if you've been listening to the show for the last 3 years, you probably know what they're going to be, but maybe you don't, so just hold on. But first of all, I want to get into the recipe for the week. It comes from my book, Omnivore's Guide to Home Cooking. It's about that time of year. You know, we are now in September. Only less than 3 weeks left of summer. I mean, and officially, you know, they always say Labor Day is the unofficial end of summer. Well, summer's going to be ending here pretty soon. The days are getting shorter, and you know, as the days get shorter, your tomato plants, depending on where you live and such, will continue producing tomatoes, but they won't always ripen in time. So you have to pick them green. Now, where I live here in the mountains, we're not only just a few weeks away from fall, we're only about a month away from our first frost. And less than 2 months away from our first snow. We always get our first snow on Halloween. I mean, you can almost predict it, right? So this is something, you know, I'm definitely already thinking about, and you know, already picked a few green tomatoes and made a batch. I love pickled green tomatoes in the first place, so it's no sacrifice. Whereas I want as many nice, fresh, ripe tomatoes as possible to eat raw, to eat in salads, to make in a tomato sauce. Plenty of them get blanched and, well, peeled and put in the freezer. When it comes to green, it's really hard to beat pickles. So in my book, you see there are well, I guess I would say 3 different ways that I recommend you know, recipes I basically use as foundational recipes with many variations for making pickles. And the first is, of course, your traditional fermented pickle. And this works really well with cucumbers and other vegetables. You know, if it's a crunchy vegetable, carrots come to mind. Radishes, absolutely. Celery, I love pickled celery. Cauliflower is really good. A mix, like, you know, your jardinera mix. You can't beat that. Peppers, very good. Although peppers take a little work, and actually cucumbers do as well. If you're going to make lacto-fermented cucumbers, you do a salt water brine. There are two real tricks to doing a good lacto-fermented cucumber, and that's one, the cucumbers have to stay under the brine at all times. If you have any floaters, they will begin to mold. Two, you need something to add some tannin to the brine to keep your cucumbers fresh. And actually there's a third, and that's you cut the bud end off of the cucumber. There's actually an enzyme in the bud end that, if not removed, will cause your cucumbers to go mushy. The tannin-containing ingredient also prevents your cucumbers from going mushy. Really lacto-fermented cucumbers, they're fully fermented, well, in about a week, and actually in about 4 days if your temperature is, over, well, we'll just say around 75 degrees in your house, and you keep them in a protected environment. So that's really your window there when something can go wrong. So by making sure they're submerged under the brine, by having enough salt in the brine, and the proportions are in my book. I'm not going to try to do them, off the top of my head, but it's no secret. You can just search on the internet and look for lacto-fermented pickles. You'll probably either find my recipe or Sandra Katz's recipe or a good recipe on, I don't know, the Food Network. I know the Grow Network. We posted several great pickling recipes there. Permies, they're just all over the place. Food.com and cooks.com. And there are plenty. And if you want to check YouTube videos, you'll find a ton. And but that's the secret to cucumbers, because they will get mushy if you don't put in that tannin containing ingredient. Now, that tannin containing ingredient can be an oak leaf. That's actually a very traditional way to ferment cucumbers. In other recipes, especially some Asian pickles, they'll use those beautiful Japanese maple leaves. Same thing, and the Japanese maple leaves are actually edible and quite tasty. But normally they do a very different style of pickle. So, for instance, in Japan, but if it's a brine pickle, you may see a couple of maple leaves in there. The other usual thing people might put in there, now bay leaf, well, to some extent we'll do the same, and I always put bay in my pickles, but to some extent the other thing people use a lot is tea. Regular black tea. You do not taste it in the brine. It has plenty of tannin. Just a pinch of the same tea you would use to make your morning breakfast tea or some good old southern iced tea. We'll put plenty of tannin in there. Well, when you're thinking in terms of tea, of course, what I like to use is kombucha. Kombucha is, a naturally fermented beverage made from tea and sugar. It's got plenty of tannins, and as kombucha sours, as it ferments, it gets acid, lactic acid in there, tannic acid, various acids, and if left too long, I mean, within a few weeks, you have an acidity comparable to apple cider vinegar, full of probiotic bacteria. So whenever I make a brine pickle using water and salt, I'm always going to add about a fourth cup of kombucha. It's going to jumpstart that fermentation. Instead of waiting a week for my pickles to be ready, using the kombucha, they're totally done in 4 days. So that cuts that window down where a bad bacteria could get in there, or the pickles could float, or whatever, and they get moldy or mushy, and all that good lactobacillus and other probiotic bacteria and fungi that are in the kombucha will actually help stave off the bad guys. So that is like my fail-proof way of doing dill pickles, and that recipe is in the book. The other option, obviously, is a vinegar and water mix. Just about half vinegar to half water, And that is, I think the best is refrigerator pickles, and you're not letting them ferment. You don't have to worry so much about things going bad. It's fail-safe. You put your vegetables in there, you put your herbs, you put your spices, you pour your vinegar and water mix over it and stick it in the refrigerator. And in a week or 2 or 3 or 5 or whatever, you've got good pickles, but they're not going to have that nutritional, or I should say, gut health, immune supportive aspect of fermented pickles. So whenever possible, I like to ferment my pickles. So that is really that's how I do just about everything, is really with a mix of salt brine and kombucha. In softer vegetables, really just straight kombucha works best. If you either that or with a vinegar and water mix, about half, half and half. And it really does depend on the acidity of the vinegar. If it's apple cider vinegar or white vinegar, you're looking at like half to half. if you're looking at maybe sherry vinegar or rice wine vinegar that has a lower acidity, so you might not want to do as much water. But like I said, I would much rather use kombucha. If you make kombucha, you always have extra sour kombucha on hand. You just can't drink that much of it. If you drink more than about a cup of kombucha, it'll actually send you right to the bathroom in about an hour. And it's what they call a purgative. Really the best laxative I know of. So unless you're making it for several people, you're going to have extra kombucha. So I just bottle that and stick it in a cabinet. And when I make pickles, take out a cup or two at a time, and that's how I make my pickles. So with green tomatoes, I would not do a straight salt water and brine. They're just too soft. Now, if they were whole cherry tomatoes, yeah, still I wouldn't do it. And it's because if you don't slice them open, the bacteria and such is going to have trouble getting to the sugars to do a good ferment. Now, you could cut them in half, and that would work a lot better, but you're probably going to end up with mushy tomatoes. So really, a straight kombucha brine would be what I would use, ideally, or a vinegar and water brine. Straight kombucha brine really is my preference, but if the refrigerator pickles, which is what most people are going to do, just have to have, say, apple cider vinegar or white vinegar and water. It's going to be fine. And then you're just talking about flavoring them. Well, dill, obviously. Dill is fantastic. Like I said, I like to include a bay leaf in just about any batch of pickles I make. I like that flavor. Mustard seed, coriander. Um, Thyme is nice. Optional. That's just an individual choice. Always garlic. Several cloves of garlic. Onions, optional. The only thing about making fermented pickles, if you're using the kombucha brine and leaving them out on the counter, you know, of course you're going to have to use an airlock to keep bad bacteria out and let it gas off the carbon dioxide. The onions and garlic as they ferment for about 3 days smell so strong they could just about run you out of the house. But after they're done, they taste fantastic. Of course, mustard seed, coriander seed, a sprig of rosemary, very nice, especially with tomatoes. If yeah, and that's it. I mean, it really is that simple. And you could, I mean, if you've got plenty of tomato plants out there in your garden and you're getting all these green tomatoes coming in, you could put up 10, 20 gallons of fermented pickles, and after they've finished gassing off, after they're fully fermented, you can just store them at room temperature. Put a lid on it and store it. I mean, I'm not. Maybe the FDA, maybe the USDA, I don't know. Would be well, I don't know. Whoever's dictating food safety would say no, but that's actually how people preserve food for thousands of years. Sauerkraut, fermented pickles, etc. Never canned, because that actually kills the good bacteria that pasteurizes it. Never, no need to refrigerate it unless you just you like a cold pickle, and you want your fermentation slowed at a certain point so it's nice and crisp. I do that. Well, I do that always with cucumbers. When they get to exactly where I want them, they go in the fridge. But, tomatoes, I really would not worry about it. But that's me. You follow whatever food safety guidelines you think. The vinegar and water pickles, you could, if you wanted to, add a little sugar to it. I know some people are going to want a sweeter pickle than I do. I don't add sugar. I mean, I don't like that. If you add sugar, you might want to add a few cloves. You might want to give it sort of a spicy sweet countered with the sour. I always, of course, would put a hot pepper in with anything. I don't care if it's cucumber pickle, I don't care if it's tomato pickle, carrots, radishes, just about anything other than sauerkraut. And of course, I make a lot of pickled peppers just on their own. The thing with the peppers, this is why I want to circle around to it. Just like a tomato, the uh, the brine, the lactobacillus brine of saltwater, or using a kombucha, is going to have trouble getting to the sugars in that pepper unless you pierce it. Like I said, you can slice a tomato in half, or you can, with a pepper, you can actually just poke holes in it, or you can cut them into slices. The reason I always either cut my peppers lengthwise in half or crossways into little slices is because air is inside that pepper. You know, it's hollow. You open up a pepper and it's open in there, and there's a membrane with the seeds, but it's full of air. So when we're fermenting pickles, everything has to be kept below the brine. You can't do that with peppers unless you cut them. They will float. I don't care what kind of weight you put on top. It's just like trying to hold a beach ball underwater. They're going to find a way up. But pickled peppers done that way with kombucha infused saltwater brine actually ferment very well, and they're really delicious. And that brine itself has 1,000 uses, whether it's a vinegar brine or whether it's a kombucha brine. The best, I think, topping for collard greens, mustard greens, turnips, really turnip greens. I have to have my hot pepper vinegar to go on my greens. That is an absolute must. So, but anyway, with the tomatoes, I definitely put a hot pepper in there, whether it's a dried cayenne, whether it's just some crushed red pepper flakes, certainly some black peppercorns, and the salt content really is up to you if you're using either kombucha or vinegar. If you were doing with cucumbers, it's a straight lactobacillus ferment. You have to have a specific amount of salt in the brine. Because of the kombucha is just so full of that, the good bacteria, you're not using salt as a preservative in that way. And because, of course, vinegar is not actively fermenting, and is very acidic, you don't have to use as much salt. Now, I think pickles need a goodly amount of salt to bring out their flavor, but it really is up to you. With a kombucha brine or a vinegar and water brine, for quart, I may just use a tablespoon to two, just depending on taste, and what I'm actually fermenting. For a lactobacillus brine, you may need 4 tablespoons. Like I said, I don't have the exact proportions right in front of me, and I don't want to tell you the wrong thing because, food preservation is something that does have a minimal amount of risk. Fermented foods have very little risk, I would say. But again, that's my opinion. It's not like canning, where if you have the wrong acid level, you could die of botulism or something. I I really do enjoy Sandor Katz's books, and he's absolutely, in my opinion, absolutely reckless with the way he ferments. I mean, he definitely has a taste for some funky stuff that may be a little closer to rotten than fermented than I like. But there really is a wide window of safety when it comes to fermented foods. And dehydrated foods and such as that you just don't really find in either canned or cold stored foods. I mean, if you're storing something in the refrigerator or the freezer and the power goes out for an extended period of time, it will turn bad. You know, and that's an inherent risk, or there's a risk of freezer burn. If you're using fermentation to preserve your vegetables, very little risk at all, in my opinion. Um, like I said, Sander ferments meats, and well, I mean, I do enjoy pickled fish and such, but he can get pretty funky with some of his recipes. Now, of course, cheese is fermented milk, and some cheeses, they need to be kept on refrigeration. Some are really good at room temperature. It depends really on the moisture content of that cheese. I mean, think about Parmigiano Reggiano, right? I mean, that's a hard, salt brined cheese that's just going to sit around on the shelf for years and years and years. Uh, Very different from your just grocery store, I don't know, just, cheddar cheese or something that you bring home, and if it's left sitting out, it's going to start to mold. Uh, so you're always balancing, the good bacteria against the bad. But I do think with just a little bit of caution and the kombucha, I think it makes a huge difference. I always add kombucha to any fermented pickle recipe. And of course, you can make your own vinegars out of apple peels, You can make rice vinegar. It's a little bit harder. I've done it. I made rice wine and let some of it go to vinegar. You can make your own wine vinegars. Really not very difficult at all. In fact, in making wine and brewing beer, the challenge is always not to let the acetobacter, that's the bacteria that makes vinegar, get to your wine and beer because it will turn your wine or beer into vinegar. Really nasty tasting vinegar until it ages. But when you do it purposefully, you can make some pretty good young vinegars. I've made some very good young vinegars. So fascinating subject. Like I said, there's a ton of information on fermentation in my book, The Omnivore's Guide to Home Cooking. Uh, Sander Katz, he's really the, well, I guess premier fermenter of our era. Really interesting, colorful guy. Not we certainly don't share politics and ideology, but he does some great work. Jason White on the Plans and Provisions podcast interviewed him a few months ago. Check that out. You know, you've heard Jason on this show, and I've been on his show. Great guy. You'll enjoy that. And of course, there's the Noma Guide to Fermentation. That's incredibly good. Bill Mollison, the father of permaculture, actually was one of the first guys to really get into all this like cultural traditions of fermentation from around the world and write a book about it decades before Sander did. And his book, if you can find it, it's called Ferment and Human Nutrition. It's fantastic. And actually, some of Sander's work is incredibly similar to Bill Mollison's book. And I'm not saying he ripped him off, but I think they were just on the same path, kind of discovering the same things. Definitely check that out. And Mollison's book is out of print, but I think you can find a copy on archive.org. If they put it back in print, that's great. Last time I checked, if you found a used copy, it was like $300 or $400, which is just insane. Um, you know, it just really. There's some good books on fermentation. There's several others I have on my shelf that don't come to mind right now. But like I said, if you want the basics, my book, Omnivore's Guide, talking with Jason White, speaking of, a few weeks ago, we did an interview, and he said he was making sauerkraut. I'm like, oh, what recipe did you use? He's, I got your recipe. I'm like, what? That was kind of cool. He's like, yeah, it's one of Judson Carroll's quick and dirty recipes. I'm like, yeah, that's the way I do things. It's just no exact measurements, learn the technique, and once you learn the technique, you got it down. You can ferment anything from turnip roots to broccoli stems. You can make your own kimchi, of course, sauerkraut. You can make your own vinegars, beers, and wines, and all that's in my book. And it's just, that's my style. I just tell you how to do it, and I'm like, all right, these are your proportions. Figure out based on how much you have on hand. You got a 3 pound head of cabbage. You're going to use approximately this much salt. You got less cabbage, you'll use less. You got more, use more. And I got all my little tips and techniques that I've learned through trial and error. Like if you don't have a fancy fermentation airlock and you're making, say, a quart jar of sauerkraut, put a rubber glove over the top of it. Secure it in place with a rubber band. As the cabbage ferments and it gases off, the rubber glove will fill up like a balloon. And your kraut's totally protected. The air can't get in, but you have enough expansive room for the gases to get out without worrying about anything bursting or overflowing. That's just a little easy, cheap way to do things. And I've come up with 1,000 things like that. But it's some people call it MacGyver cooking. Some people call it hillbilly engineering. It's the way I grew up, on the farm, and you make do. If you don't have what you need in terms of fancy kitchen equipment, and the nearest town that has a store that sells it is an hour and a half or 2 hours away, you just make something. You look around and you figure it out. I mean, it's not that hard, actually. You can get by with just a few pots and pans, and you can even, if you don't have a decent stove, you can learn to cook on a grill. I mean, it's cooking's not rocket science. It's an art. It's not a science. It's an art. But anyway, let's get into today's herb, which are the alliums. It's actually many, many herbs that you're going to find wild. Many of them are called weeds. These are the ancestors to onions and garlic and shallots and leeks and chives that you grow in your garden. And medicinally, they're incredibly good for you. The wild alliums, my favorite is ramps. Ramps grow wild here in the mountains. They come in right around Easter and then they're gone. They're a wild leek. They are sweet. They are pungent. They are absolutely delicious. And that's what I look forward to every year. And they are excellent pickled. While you don't want to harvest too many bulbs because they won't come back, you mainly want to harvest the leaves because they'll regrow leaves. Those bulbs make some fantastic uh, pickled onions. They're just the best. There's also more common and grows all over the place. Allium canadense, which is meadow garlic. Allium vinale. Yeah, I think it's not quite coming to my mind, but it's called field garlic, crow garlic, onion grass, or wild onions. You're probably going to find that in your yard. I mean, every time you cut the grass and that smell of onions comes up, you've just cut down some wild onions or garlic. It's that simple. The There are some herbs, some plants that look like wild onions and garlic but aren't and can be toxic. For instance, lily of the valley can look very much like ramps, depending on what stage of growth it's in. The rule of thumb for foragers is that if it looks like an onion or garlic, etc., and it smells like an onion, it's an allium. If it looks like an onion but does not smell like an onion, it's probably a poisonous member of the lily family. Be careful and don't eat it. It's really that simple. When you're out foraging, whatever you find that looks like an onion or garlic or a leek or whatever and smells like an onion, garlic, or leek is generally considered safe. Now, I'm just going to say generally considered because while I don't know of any that smell like an onion that are poisonous, there could be one in some corner of the world that I've never encountered. So use your field guide, use your phone ID app, whatever. But that's the forager saying. If it looks like an onion, smells like an onion, it's an onion. And as far as I know, it was always found to be valid. But I will put that little caveat out there just in case there's something I don't know about. But it is a unique scent, the scent of onions and garlic. And these plants have been used medicinally for, well, as long as human history. I mean, these are probably, well, certainly some of the very first herbs known to man. Dioscorides wrote extensively about the allium family. I can't I can't even begin to scratch the surface on all the herbal information I have on the alliums. But I'll just give you a little overview of some of them, basically. For leeks, he said, interestingly, he thought they could cause bad dreams, but I don't know. Maybe he could cause some kind of indigestion if eaten raw if you're not used to them. He even thought they could cause dullness of sight, believe it or not. But anyway, he thought it was good for the stomach, expels the menstrual flow, was bad for ulcerated bladders and kidneys, by the way, but good expectorant, and yes, all the alliums are. He said the seed was somewhat astringent, and mixed with vinegar and frankincense would stop bleeding, especially internal bleeding, nosebleeds to menstrual issues, essentially. Um, cleanses the lungs. Uh, and I think he was actually the first person to record, at least in that I know of. It could have, I don't know. Someone before him may have figured this out, but it was probably a well-known thing by ancient Greece that if you took the juice of garlic, onions, leeks, shallots, whatever, and put it in the ears, it was good for earaches and ear infections. He specifically said of leeks, the juice dropped in the ears with vinegar and frankincense and rosacea, that's rose oil, helps earaches and noises in the ear. Frankincense also has some antibiotic properties, antibacterial and such, so that would be a very good combination. And the leaves applied would help with pustules caused by smallpox or ulcerated sores. Wild leek, which is more like our wild ramp, I guess, he said was more uretic, promoting urination and expelling menstrual flow, and good if those bitten by poisonous beasts eat it. Now, okay, it sounds crazy, right? But all the onions have antimicrobial, antibiotic properties. So they've often been used both internally and applied as a poultice for all kinds of bites, stings, infections. They're really very good. The Allium saved many lives, especially during World War One. When people would get, cut or shot, they were often used to to prevent infection and to help heal up those wounds. Of onions, he describes several. They already had red and white onions, long onions, and all kinds of stuff. And they were onions and garlic both very popular in ancient Roman and Greek food. And he said of the onion, though, interesting, the juice rubbed on with honey helps dull sight. So he thought leeks caused it. He thought this helps it. I don't know. He said it's good for purging, good for the bowels, opening the passages of excrement. So good for constipation anyway. Good for hemorrhoids. They even use it as a suppository. Um, Good for clouds in the eyes. That would be, cataracts, as well as angina. And actually, the alliums do have very many good cardiac uses, and they have been shown to help with angina. Um, Good for bringing on menses, um, opening the sinuses. Good for those bitten by dogs, applied with rue and honey. Honey also has antibiotic, antimicrobial properties, as does rue. Very good. Interestingly, combined with vinegar and rubbed on the skin when the person was in the sun, helped with inflammations caused by leprosy. Combined with poultry grease, chicken fat, it's good for shoe chafing, sores, causing your feet, blisters by the shoes. Excessive discharges of the intestine, hardness of hearing, noise in the ears, and onion juice is also good for dripping in the ears. That's, for earaches and infections, and for the loss of hair rubbed on the scalp. Interesting, huh? Boiled onion, he said, was a diuretic, and applied as a plaster with raisins, it ripens and breaks swelling sores. Of garlic, apparently is widely cultivated and had been, well, garlic was very popular among the Egyptians, and much of Greek tradition does owe to Egyptians. So um, certainly these herbs were known thousands of years before they were ever recorded in writing. And he talked about the garden and wild garlic. He said it had a warming quality, expels flatulence. He said it could cause indigestion. If you ever had hot garlic, you eat your garlic raw and it's really hot, it will cause some serious stomach upset. We You want to avoid that, and the best way to do it is to crush it and let the air get to it for a little bit, oxidize a bit. He said that eaten, this is especially the wild garlic, it would draw out bloodworms and was a good diuretic. And he said it is good like nothing else for those bitten by vipers. Well, you know about that, huh? And also for excessive menstrual bleeding taken in wine. Pounded into small pieces and taken in wine as a drink, he said. Applied as a poultice, it is applied to anyone bitten by a mad dog. Now, I, of course, am not going to recommend you use garlic if bitten by a dog with rabies, but for thousands of years, that was one of the go-to primary, especially if done right away, treatments. And apparently people lived. So, I mean, obviously serious condition and, you know, call 911 right away. But I'm just saying, that's how powerful garlic was believed to be as antimicrobial, antiseptic, antibiotic, etc., etc. Has some antiviral properties. Eaten is good against, let's see, to clear the throat. It clears arteries, and actually it does. The alliums are all very good for cholesterol. That's been proven by modern science. Lessens old coughs. Taken as a drink with oregano, it kills lice and nits. Mixed with honey, it cures bruised eyes. Burnt and mixed with honey, he actually said. That would stink like the dickens, but yeah. Rubbed on for loss of hair. Sores caused by leprosy and other skin diseases, freckles, running ulcers of the head, dandruff, and psoriasis. Boiled with pine pitch and frankincense and kept in the mouth, it lessens toothaches. A poultice with fig leaves and cumin, good for those bitten by the shrew mouse. Well, I hope we don't have any shrew mice around, but hey, you know what to do if you do. A decoction of the leaves in a hip bath brings down menstrual flow in afterbirth. It is also inhaled as a smoke for the same purpose. Stamping garlic with black olives induces the movement of urine, opens the mouth of veins, and is good for dropsy. And is also a very popular condiment. Actually, garlic and a couple herbs with black olives pounded together. I cannot remember the name of that. Very popular condiment from that area of the Mediterranean. Quite tasty. Um, it's going to bug me, but maybe it'll come to me as I read. All right, he talks about Spanish garlic or shallots. He said used as a vegetable, eaten like leeks, more mild, but does the same as onions and garlic, and that's still true today. Chives, also more mild, but does the same as onions and garlic essentially. But he said it was the root of chive was good against poisonings and bewitchings. So if you're any, if Samantha comes and twitches her nose, be sure to have some. If Samantha came and started twitching her nose around me, I always had quite a crush on Samantha from Bewitched, and I Dream of Jeannie. Yes, those were my two big crushes in my childhood. Anyway, of course, Barbara Eden. Who wouldn't? Uh, by Gerard's time in the 1500s, he said, well, he's talked about a lot about Theophrastus and what Pliny had written on onions, and they're all about the same, same uses. But he said the onions would thin the mucus and cause dryness. He recommended, of course, being English, eating your onions well boiled. Not exactly my favorite way to eat onions. Roasted, fried, but raw. But anyway, they did not eat raw vegetables in 1500s England. That was like not done. Uh, he said it was good against flatulence, would provoke urine, better boiled than raw again. And he said they do not nourish at all. Actually, they're very full of good nutrients and calories. There's some sugars in there. He said they were good for such, or replete with raw and phlegmatic humors, a lot of congestion. And for women that their terms stayed upon a cold cause, provokes menstruation. He said, Galen writeth that they do provoke the hemorrhoids to bleed if laid upon them, either by themselves or stamped with vinegar. The juice of onion sniffed up the nose, purgeth the head, and draweth forth raw phlegmatic humors. In other words, it clears your sinuses. Stamped with salt, rue, and honey, applied against the biting of a mad dog. Roasted on the embers and applied, they ripen and break cold apostumes, boils, and such like. Boils, essentially, skin sores that are welling up and need to drain. The juice of onions mixed with a decoction of pennyroyal and anointed upon the gouty member with a feather or a cloth wet therein and applied easeth the same very much. Um, okay, so gout causes the big toe to swell. I guess that's what he's referencing, but it could be really any swollen area of the body and sore. The juice anointed and put on the bald head in the sun would bring hair very speedily. I have no idea. I kind of doubt that's true, but hey, if you're balding, give it a shot. What do you got to lose, right? So the juice of an onion applied to the head while you're in the sun. I don't know. Um, he said the juice of an onion would take away the heat of scalds and burns. Again, I've never tried it. I don't know. Onions diced and dipped in the juice of sorrel, given unto the sick of a tertian ague to eat, take away the fit in once or twice so taking them. Which I love that Elizabethan English. Okay, a tertian ague was generally a malarian fever, a fever caused by malaria or other illnesses that would come on every third day. And he decided that onions and sorrel, given to a person having fevers every 3 days, taken once or twice, would cure them of it. Beats me. Um, anyway, Gerard wrote, well, that was of onion. We're still, okay. And that was of onion, and of garlic, Gerard wrote, he said, being eaten, it heateth the body extremely. And that's what we talked about earlier, how garlic can be very hot. Not the best way to eat it. But it would thin mucus taken that way. And it does. Not the most pleasant way to use it, but it does. And cutteth through such are tough and clammy. So we're talking really thick mucus. Also opens obstructions and is an enemy to all cold poisons, the bitings of venomous beasts. And therefore Galen nameth Theriaca rusticorium. Okay, you may remember theriac was an ancient formula which was supposed to be a cure for all poisons and bites of venomous beasts. Uh, in Galen's time, I'm assuming he believed that garlic was the prime component. It's actually a mix of several herbs, but he apparently thought garlic was the most important, and so he called it by the name Theriaca. Uh, Gerard said, it yieldeth the body no nourishment at all. It actually is very, very nourishing. Garlic, onions, all of them. Um, he said people that had naughty and sharp blood and a hot complexion should abstain from it. Hopefully your blood is not naughty and you can enjoy your garlic. Um, it's I eat a ton of garlic. Take away the roughness of the throat, and that's true. Garlic has often been mixed with honey and used for sore throats and um, hoarseness and such. It helpeth an old cough, provoketh urine, and breaketh and consumeth wind. It is also a remedy for dropsy, which is retaining fluids. Retaining fluids. It killeth the worms in the belly and drive them forth. It helpeth the cold stomach, and is good against contagious and pestilent air. So even though they did not understand viruses and such at the time, bacterial infections, etc., they knew that air could be contagious. In a person's sick room, they'd often burn, various herbs and such to make them less contagious. Fumigate. Well, even in the 1500s, they knew that garlic would help prevent you from catching plagues and flus and awful stuff. And garlic's in the fire cider and such that is an old remedy. He said applied topically was good for ringworms, scabbed heads of children, dandruff, scurf, which is like psoriasis, mixed with honey, he said. He again says that about that bite of a shrew mouse. I have no idea what that is, and I really don't want to. He listed wild garlic and ramps together, called ramsons in English. He said they're stronger and of more force than garden garlic, and that's true. Ramps are used in the mountains where I live as a spring tonic to boost the immune system, and people say that if you eat enough raw ramps in the spring, you won't be sick the rest of the year. I can tell you that I ate as many as I can get my hands on. I think they're absolutely delicious. And he basically said the same of leeks, but again, that they're not quite as strong. And the same of chives. He goes on and on about the alliums. I guess Culpeper said about the same thing about 100 years later. He said that onions would provoke flatulence, which that's actually but I think he means raw. And you know they can make you burp a little bit. You know, no big deal. In my opinion, I eat raw onions in my salad all the time. But again, the English did not eat raw salads. Everything had to be cooked because the English have always had bad teeth and digestive issues. That's just just part of the English culture to some extent. But I do really think it's more genetic. He said that they would provoke appetite, increase thirst, ease the belly and the bowels, provoke women's courses, help with the biting of a mad dog and other venomous creatures when used with honey and rue, increase sperm. That is actually believed in many cultures. It is believed that eating the alliums make a man more potent, and that's true from ancient Chinese medicine to even Native Americans. I mean, all across the globe, from one side to the other, and throughout Europe. Uh, throughout Europe, um, the English used to criticize the Italians and such, and French for eating too much garlic, and thinking it made them, a little intemperate, shall we say. Um, they kill worms in children if they are drunk with water fasting, wherein they have been steeped all night. Being roasted under embers and eaten with honey or sugar and oil, they much conduce to help an inveterate cough and expectorate phlegm. Um, yeah, just a real common use of onions, whether taken internally or laid on the chest under a plaster, under some paper or um, a mix of flour and water and such. And they really do. That is another like proven use of alliums. They're really good for chest colds, really good for sore throats. They can be put around the neck as a poultice. A friend from Mexico, her family remedy whenever there's someone who has a cold coming on is to slice onions, put them on the soles of the feet, and wrap the feet, and go to sleep. And put on some socks. The next morning you wake up and you don't have a cold. Don't know how it works, but I mean that's very different cultures with very same uses for onions. Uh, Interestingly, he basically says that um, no one in England eats garlic because it makes the breath bad. But then he goes on and gives essentially the same uses for garlic as given by the Greek herbalist, with an interesting, um, what would I say, an interesting twist. He said that eating garlic would help prevent you getting sick from drinking bad water. Now, some very bad advice that he gave was that garlic was a remedy for taking wolfbane, henbane, hemlock, and other poisonous and dangerous herbs. I'm sorry, I cannot endorse that. If you drink, if any way you consume wolfbane, aconite, henbane, which is in the Datura family, or poison hemlock, you're probably gonna die. I don't think enough garlic. I don't think there's enough garlic out there to save you. Um, yeah, and I don't really see how the garlic would have any power to reverse those effects, because especially wolfsbane and the poison hemlock slow and stop the heart essentially, and wolfsbane also paralyzes the lungs. The henbane is really nasty stuff. That's what witches used to poison people with. In very small amounts, it would make them have horrible hallucinations, demons coming after them, and all that. And a little bit more than that would kill them. That's bad stuff to mess with. So let's get on to, of chives. He said the same, but more mild. We'll get into more contemporary 1930s with Miss Grieve. She again lists them all separate, but they all have many, overlapping qualities. Basically, you're going to say that wild onions and garlic ramps are the strongest and do more of what all the others do, right? After that, garlic is the strongest, then onions, and we'll come down from there. Leeks, shallots, chives. I don't think I'm leaving any out, but but they all do basically the same thing. Of onion, she said it was antiseptic and diuretic. Roasted onion is a useful application of tumors or earache. She used roasted onion instead of just onion juice. So, the warmth of a roasted onion can also help ease earache. The juice made into syrup is good for coughs and colds. And combined with gin was good for gravel and dropsy. So diuretic helped get rid of kidney and bladder stones and pull off excess fluid. And onions mixed with gin would probably be pretty nasty, but hey, it's medicinal, right? I don't know. Um, her entry on garlic was pretty interesting. She said, in England, garlic, apart from its medical purposes, is seldom used except as a seasoning, but in the southern countries of Europe, it is a common ingredient in dishes. Of course, yeah, Spain, Italy, France, etc. From the earliest times, indeed, garlic has been used as as an article of diet. Garlic was placed by the ancient Greeks, as Theophrastus relates, on piles of stones at crossroads as a supper for Hecate, and according to Pliny, garlic and onion were invocated as deities by the Egyptians at takings of oaths. So the Egyptians actually considered garlic and onions to be sacred. So yeah, I do think a lot of the Greek and Roman tradition owes to the Egyptians. But then, also garlic very important in ancient Jewish herbal medicine. In fact, the Ashkenazi Jews especially use it as like a primary medicine, and say that they survived the Holocaust and all the other trials and plagues they've been through the past few thousand years, mainly because they eat so much garlic. The She said that it was largely consumed by ancient Greeks and Romans, and as we may read in Virgil's, I cannot remember how to pronounce that name, but anyway, Horace, all right, Eclogues, yes, Virgil's Eclogues, if I remember correctly. Horace, however, recounts his detestation. Horace hated garlic, the smell of which, even in his days, and as much later in Shakespeare's time, was accounted as a sign of vulgarity. Remember how I said that the English believed that, especially the French and Italians, were vulgar, oversexed people? They blamed that much on garlic. But Horace said it was more poisonous than hemlock, and relates that he was made ill by eating it at the table of Maecenas. Among the ancient Greeks, persons who took part of it were not allowed to enter the temples of Cybele, Cybele. Homer, however, tells us that it was to the virtues of the yellow garlic that Ulysses owed his escape from being changed by Circe into a pig like his companions. So, Homer at least liked his garlic. Anyway, there's so much lore. She even says that, according to a Muslim legend, when Satan stepped out of the Garden of Eden after the fall of man, garden sprang from the spot where he placed his left foot, an onion from where he placed his right foot. So in ancient Islamic legends, garlic and onions were the work of the devil. Yeah, I'm glad I'm not Muslim. I'm a Catholic hillbilly who loves my garlic and onions. Of a mix of French and Irish heritage, both cultures who love onions and garlic, and I, I'm part English as well. I guess I didn't take after my ancestors in that regard. Though they do use a lot of onions in England. British cooking has nothing without onions. That's probably the main flavor, actually. So yeah, they just didn't like garlic. Um, yeah, she goes on and on about the history of the plant, ancient Anglo-Saxon names for it, and legends. Um, wow, I mean, there's just so much very interesting. And this is all from my book, The Medicinal Weeds of the American Southeast. So if you want to know what useful plants are going wild in your yard, be sure to grab it. And it's got all these really interesting anecdotes and historical lore. And she describes garlic She describes ramps and, of course, the onions and all that. For ramps and wild garlic, she said diaphoretic, meaning it helps with fevers, diuretic, expectorant, and stimulant. Many marvelous effects and healing powers have been ascribed to garlic. It possesses stimulant and stomatic properties in addition to other virtues. As an antiseptic, its use has long been recognized. In the late war, she was talking World War One, it was widely employed in the control of suppuration in wounds. The raw juice is expressed, diluted in water, and put on swabs of sterilized sphagnum moss. This is what they had before cotton balls, which were applied to the wound. Where this treatment has been given, it has been proved that there have been no septic results, and the lives of thousands of men have been saved by its use. Garlic probably saved more lives in World War One than any pharmaceutical medicine. This was pre-penicillin, and they had garlic. She said it is sometimes applied externally in ointments and lotions as an antiseptic to disperse hard swellings, and pounded and employed in a poultice for scrofulous sores. It is said to prevent anthrax in cattle, being largely used for this purpose. In olden days, it was used for leprosy, smallpox, etc. It formed the principal ingredient in the Four Thieves vinegar, which was adapted so successfully at Marseille for protection against the plague, where it prevailed there in 1722. This originated, it is said, with four thieves who confessed that whilst protected by the liberal use of aromatic vinegar during the plague, they plundered the dead bodies of its victims with complete security. Yeah, the Four Thieves vinegar was what saved many people from the plague, and that recipe's in my book. And if I have time, I'll tack it on the end of the show. Um, she said it was used for outbreaks of infectious fevers in London in the last century. The French priests who constantly used garlic in all their dishes visited the worst cases with impunity, whilst the English clergy caught the infection and in many instances fell victim to the disease. There you go, English folks. We Frenchies have it right when it comes to eating garlic. The French priests ate garlic and they didn't get sick. The English priests would not eat garlic. They got sick and died. Syrup of garlic is an invaluable medicine for asthma, hoarseness, coughs, difficulty breathing, and most other disorders of the lungs, particularly in virtue in chronic bronchitis, etc., etc., is a remedy for asthma. Um, the syrup of garlic, by the way, is made by melting 1.5 ounces of sugar in 1 ounce of raw expressed juice of garlic. Bruised and mixed with lard, garlic has been used to relieve whooping cough if rubbed on the chest and between the shoulders. Successful treatment of tubercular consumption by garlic has been recorded. The freshly expressed juice diluted with quantities of water or spirit of wine being inhaled antiseptically. Clove to garlic pounded with honey, taken 2 or 3 nights successively is good for rheumatism. She even says that an infusion of bruised bulbs of garlic given before and after every meal has been considered of good effect in epilepsy. I don't know. That's not been proved in modern use. You'll have to check into that. Garlic used for dropsy, sniffed into the nostrils, good for stuffy nose, etc., etc. Um, Wine of garlic, macerating 3 or 4 bulbs of garlic in wine and used topically is a good stimulant for the baldness of the head. So again, I don't know. Hey, I have no idea. Thank God I have a very thick, full head of hair, probably due to my Irish heritage. Put in a chicken's food daily would prevent many poultry diseases. I mean, etc. I mean, it's absolutely amazing. Um, let's see. Oh, then we get into all kinds of, yeah, that pretty much sums it up. And there's no need for me to go any further on it, but I will try to give you that Four Thieves vinegar recipe. I have given this to you before, but we are almost at an hour, so let me see what I can do very quickly. All right, so Four Thieves vinegar, also called Four Thieves tonic. I just gave you the story of how these thieves in Marseille um, were robbing victims of the plague and not catching the plague because they were using, according to Rene Maurice Gattefossé, I guess, published the original recipe in 1937. And he was an aromatherapist, by the way, and actually said that they didn't drink this vinegar. They applied it around their nose and sniffed it. So that's a little bit of controversy. Some people say it should be taken internally, but the original recipe said it was rubbed onto the hands, ears, and temples when approaching plague victims. Interesting, huh? In the original recipe, as recorded, it says it doesn't actually mention garlic. It says to use 50 cloves. Now, I don't know if he meant to say cloves of garlic or if people have assumed he meant garlic, but he just says 50 cloves. So I'm going to give you the original recipe. Take 3 pints of strong white vinegar and add a handful each of wormwood, meadowsweet, wild marjoram, and sage, 50 cloves, 2 ounces of campanula root, 2 ounces of angelica, rosemary and horehound, and 3 large measures of camphor. Place the mixture in a container for 15 days, strain and express, then bottle. Use by rubbing it on the hands, and ears, and temples from time to time when approaching a plague victim. So, you see that recipe did not mention garlic. We don't know if he intended to say 50 cloves of garlic or if he meant 50 cloves, which are the spice. But the modern version used by most modern herbalists is much more simple, and it's used internally, usually about a tablespoon diluted water, you know, at least each morning or maybe a couple times throughout the day if you're around someone with the flu or some other bad virus. And the herbs that are included are garlic, rosemary, cloves, like the actual spice cloves, sage, juniper berry, thyme, and cinnamon. So you'll see various variations of this in different books by different herbalists. But in the modern version, garlic is the primary ingredient. So we have to wonder, when he said 50 cloves, did he mean cloves of garlic or clove the spice? If it, Galen had said, 2,500 years earlier or so, that garlic was called theriac, making it the prime ingredient in one of these cure-all type of tonics. And so, who knows? Who knows? But many herbalists, I know Rosemary Gladstar's talked about this, Susan Weed, all kinds of them, that make Fourth East tonic. They use garlic and they swear by it. I just eat a ton of garlic. I specifically like pickled garlic. I make it, the same way I described pickling onions and tomatoes and cucumbers and all that earlier. I love garlic. I eat a ton of garlic. So y'all have a great week, and I'll talk to you next time.
The information in this podcast is not intended to diagnose or treat any disease or condition. Nothing I say or write has been evaluated or approved by the FDA. I'm not a doctor. The U.S. government does not recognize the practice of herbal medicine, and there is no governing body regulating herbalists. Therefore, I'm really just a guy who studies herbs. I'm not offering any advice. I won't even claim that anything I write or say is accurate or true. I can tell you what herbs have been traditionally used for. I can tell you my own experience and if I believe an herb has helped me. I cannot nor would I tell you to do the same. If you use an herb anyone recommends, you are treating yourself. You take full responsibility for your health. Humans are individuals and no two are identical. What works for me may not work for you. You may have an allergy, a sensitivity, an underlying condition that no one else even shares and you don't even know about. Be careful with your health. By continuing to listen to my podcast or read my blog, you agree to be responsible for yourself, do your own research, make your own choices, and not to blame me for anything ever.